Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with me, Christian Harris. I'm sharing another Safety Roundtable event with you today, and this one's called Here's Why Health and Safety Should Be Overseen by Your Sales Director. Now, whether I mean that literally or not, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to spoil it for you in this introduction, but I will answer that question and give you some things to think about around this topic. And the idea around this is just to be presenting a slightly disruptive idea, but to try to make you think a bit differently, perhaps, about your approach and what you could learn from other functions within your businesses. The Safety Roundtable happens every Wednesday. We occasionally share episodes here on the podcast. Do sign up and join me on the discussion one week coming up. You can find the details on safetyroundtable.co.uk. And as you'll hear when we get into this episode, the way it works is I give my thoughts for typically about 15 minutes or something like that on a topic, and then we open it up to a live discussion. We typically have between 20 and 50 people on. Everybody gets the chance to interact, and it's a good time. We learn, we share, we collaborate, we create relationships, and I'd really recommend, if you're a fan of the podcast, coming along and sampling the Safety Roundtable one Wednesday. With that then, let's get into this episode. Here's why safety should be overseen by your sales director.
Welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast with Christian Harris. We believe that proactive safety and risk management powers business performance. Each week we explore this theme, sharing guests, stories, insights, trends, hints and tips. You can find us on all the major podcasting platforms, and video versions are available on YouTube. But for now, let's join the conversation with Christian.
So we're going to talk today, thanks for joining, about here's why safety should be overseen by your sales director. So the first thing I'm going to say is hear me out. I'm not actually suggesting that this is what we should do. We shouldn't all be putting ourselves out of a job as health and safety professionals and instead installing the sales directors to oversee safety. But actually, it's just a way of slightly thinking differently about things and maybe learning some lessons from what salespeople do and thinking about how we can apply that into our world of safety. Just a quick intro to me. My name is Christian Harris, founder of Slip Safety Services. I do various bits of content each week, podcast, roundtable, newsletter, blogs, and all sorts of stuff. Day to day, I work in the field of slips and preventing slip and fall accidents, injuries and claims for clients. Worked in some high profile cases in that area. The business has won some awards. We partner up with people like AXA, and we've got some cool clients like Network Rail. We've helped several thousand client sites over the years, and at last count, we reckon we're stopping about £10 million of claims per year. Those three nice big houses worth. So this topic sort of came slightly out of a podcast episode I did last year when I was interviewed on the Paying for Good podcast. And Corinne, who's the host, she's a sort of employee benefits and remuneration expert. And so she interviews people from different worlds about how are people incentivized in those different sectors. So she wanted to talk to me about health and safety. And I came prepared with lots of thoughts, and she did some research and spoke to some of her clients as well. And what came out of it was that basically all of the incentivization, all of the bonuses for people around health and safety are all based on outputs, outcomes, and the metrics are, what's happened as a lagging indicator. So that to me was quite interesting. And clearly we're all in the results business. But actually a lot of the good stuff that we need to do in this field is not really necessarily going to be shown by the lagging indicators. It's all about the inputs that we produce and what we're actually doing. based on the outcomes, not the inputs. Yeah. What's important in safety then? So we recently did the State of Safety report. And if you're interested, I'm running through this again in a live webinar on Monday lunchtime on LinkedIn. Going to run through all the results. We interviewed and surveyed over 300 safety leaders, and we asked them lots of questions. And one of the questions was, what are the priorities for you in terms of your personal view on priorities? And the top two were fewer people getting hurt, so that's an outcome, obviously. And number two was having certainty that my top risks are under control. And that to me is a bit more of an input, interestingly. So we're thinking there about knowing, being certain that what we're doing is working. And that's about the actions we're taking, not necessarily the outcomes that are achieved as a result of those actions. Whereas clearly fewer people getting hurt, which of course is why we're in this world, in the jobs that we do, clearly is an outcome. So what can we learn from and I put in brackets here, good sales director around this kind of point? A good sales director will focus on what they can control. So in sales, that means things like, how many times are we picking up the phone? How many emails are we sending? How many follow-ups attempts are we making for each prospect? How many networking events are we attending? How many social media interactions and all this other good stuff? And these are the things that actually, if you're good at sales, you know that you can draw a straight line between your input and what you can control, the actions that you're taking, the things you're doing. And there's a difference between that and the output, because you can do all of this good stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to buy. So you're focusing on the inputs, what you can control, not on your sales figures. Now, of course, going back to the compensation point, you're ultimately most likely to be compensated based on your sales figures. But if you're good at this, that it's the inputs that count, and the inputs that are going to drive those sales figures, because you can't leave things to chance. The second thing that I was going to touch on today in terms of safety is bringing people with us on the journey. So if we think about inputs, not outputs, and then we think about, how do we get this right? Let's bring people with us on the journey. And so that's thinking about things like words like these, shaping, motivating, persuading, enrolling, influencing, pitching, encouraging, cajoling, prompting, aligning, and all of this good stuff. And this is exactly what sales, again, a good sales director knows and does and lives and breathes on a day-to-day basis. It's all about bringing people along on the journey with you, whether that's your team, whether that's your prospects, whether that's your customers, whether that's your partners, whether that's other key stakeholders. It's all about how do we bring people on the journey, and that enables us to pitch, which is the big word there, for things like investment. So a second lesson that we could learn in health and safety is that we need to think a bit more around these types of words. And I did an episode of the podcast actually this week that came out with Laura Alcott, talking about why and how to build a personal brand in safety, and a lot of this stuff comes as a result of building your personal brand. So I'd recommend checking that one out too. So what can we learn from sales then to improve safety? I think the first thing is leading a team or leading initiatives is all about leading indicators. And then the second thing, thinking about getting an ROI, which is more about the outcome, but it's about how do we persuade, how do we influence, how do we encourage our team, our board to invest, our staff to do what we need to do. And those themes we've talked about before on the Safety Roundtable, but I think bringing it together in this sort of format is quite interesting, and just a slightly different way of thinking about things. So, as I said at the start, I'm not here to put anybody here out of a job and consign the safety profession to the dustbin and install sales leaders to oversee safety in reality. But the title was just designed to get you to think a bit differently and consider to what extent there are things you can learn from the from the sales industry or the sales profession. And not just them, but other professions, other functions within your business as well, that will help to support what you're doing, the inputs you're making, the outcomes you're achieving, and bring people along for the ride with you. So, love to open that up and get some feedback from people in the audience. There's a few of us on the Zoom, and I'll have a look on LinkedIn as well if anybody's watching on, which I'm sure they are on LinkedIn. So what did you think? Did you learn anything? Did it make you change the way you think about things slightly? Fancy a career in sales now? What about this could you implement, and any other comments? So if you want to join in, feel free to raise your hand and let me know, or type something into the chat box. And I'll monitor the LinkedIn as well. Good to see you, Rosemary, by the way. First time you've made one of these. I know the timing's not good for you normally at 9 o'clock. And Robin as well, good to see you. I haven't seen you on one of these before. What's anybody done out of interest to try to, improve on bringing people along on the journey? And have you ever thought about talking to your sales colleagues about how to do that? Is that something that you've tried or thought about? Every day, lots of listening. Bringing people along is absolutely the way to improve safety. Yeah, lots of encouragement. Love that. Kevin, I wouldn't mind. I know you have a bit of a background in sales before. If you wouldn't, I'm going to put you on the spot. What's your view on the overlap and what lessons could be learned from sales to influence how we can do things in safety?
Morning, mate. How you doing?
Yeah, good. You?
Yeah, hang on. I'm just getting sorted. So we're a bit late in from the shops. Yeah, I think. Oh, hang on. I've got a problem here. I think everybody, if they want to accept it or not, is a salesman in some form. So, if you get these people that say, "Oh, I don't like sales." Well, you know what? Well, if you don't like sales and you sell yourself every day when you're at work. Yeah. So, I don't know, when it comes to safety, I think buy-in is key. Buy-in is absolute key, and I think we can take lessons, like you were saying, from the sales teams. But I don't know. I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently. Actually, should you have to sell safety?
Yeah, I suppose you shouldn't have to, but I think you do have to, don't you?
I think we do, but yeah. I mean, I say what's getting people to understand why safety. Well, I don't know. I struggle with that a little bit, because why should you have to safely to your family at the end of the day? And it's I don't know. Yeah, I think we do need to be salespeople. But I've said it before on this session. I think maybe yes, being a salesperson is important, but also being less of a safety policeman and being more of an approachable safety advisor is probably. Maybe that's another discussion we could have on one of these. What's the difference between a safety coach and a safety officer? Yeah. But yeah, I think sales is very important. I think everybody does it. Not a lot of people realize that they're any good at it, but they're all selling themselves anyway. And I think that we can take a lot of lessons from marketing into how we talk to people and how we coach people and how we persuade people. So yeah, that's my 2 pennies for the morning, mate. Sorry, hope that was okay, because I wasn't really thinking about it at the time, but
that's all right. I know I picked on you, so
it's okay. I'm good at being picked on. Don't worry.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. There's a few good comments in the chat actually. So persuading people there's a better way, banning clipboards. Yeah, I like that. Um, interesting point here. There's too much confusion about what safety means and what is everyone's contribution. Clarity is the key. I think that's an interesting comment, isn't it? Because, as you said, Kevin, everybody understands and wants to go home safely at the end of the day, but they don't necessarily draw the line between that and thinking about other people doing that, and then what their actions are, what impact their actions are having on that during the day. So I think there's an interesting question.
It was interesting, Christian. I did some work quite a few years ago with in behavioural safety with some pretty prominent big companies in an oil and gas organisation. And they one of the things that they did was they challenged the supervision team, in a sense of, are you actually sending the right safety message to your people? In the communication. And the example that the guy used, I thought was really, really clever. It was, so you're a supervisor and you've assigned a set of work, and the work should last for, I don't know, maybe 1 hour, or the work. We estimate that the work lasts 2 hours.
Yeah.
When the guy comes back to you after 1 hour, there's two fundamental questions that you can ask for him that really drive the roots of the safety culture in the background. And the first question is, well, the first statement is, "Oh, brilliant, you finished that so quickly. Excellent, well done." Okay, and the guy's actually taken a load of shortcuts, not followed procedures, and what you've done is you've just reinforced all of those negative behaviors for them to do it again. Not by thinking that the supervisor thinks they're giving praise, but what they're actually doing is reinforcing all those negative behaviors. Or there's the turn it into a positive of going, well, we've clearly followed all of the systems. Do you have a better way of doing it? And can we rewrite the standard or rewrite the procedure to actually help us be more efficient? And that sparks a conversation. And whichever way you go down that road, it's very interesting to see that while a supervisor thinks, or a manager thinks, that they might be rewarding somebody by going, "Oh, brilliant, you finished the job safely and quickly," but what you're actually doing is reinforcing those negative behaviors that the person's done, or those shortcuts that they've done, and sending a subliminal message that it's okay to break the rules around here as long as you don't get hurt.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite an interesting take on it as well. And I think it's an element of it that we don't look at very often.
So thinking again about getting the inputs right, and actually good outputs with poor inputs shouldn't be encouraged or celebrated or allowed, because actually you're then just you're relying on luck, aren't you?
On luck, but again, that comes back to what you were talking about then about the sales, because the way a salesman talks to you is very scripted. I'm not saying that we should be scripted, but they're very conscious of the words that they're using. They're very conscious of how they're approaching it. And maybe that's something that we need to look at more within our industry, which is exactly what you've said. So yes, using the salesman analogy, but be a lot more focused on how we actually speak with people about safety, and how we coach supervisors to do the same.
Yeah, no, I like that. Good stuff. Greg, you've got your hand up. It's also your first time on the roundtable, so welcome.
It is. Good morning. Hello. Thanks all. Yeah, I was just reflecting on what Kevin said and what you were talking about earlier. An example we had a few years ago where we were doing a broad health and safety management review, but part of they had a sales force of over 100 people who were out and about every day. And one of the things they'd done was introduce telemetry on all the sales calls, because they were having huge amounts of accidents, and it was one of the reasons to offset their premium. But in looking through the data, what we tended to find with the telemetry is towards the end of the month, so it looked at speeding, it gave them a driving score, and obviously if there were any accidents, they all went up towards the end of the month, and they were saying, well, why is this occurring? And it was actually that sales reason, that you had either people who were chasing a target and therefore out and about more and therefore likely to cut more corners, or you had people who were significantly exceeding their target and wanted to do even more. So it was that kind of behavior, because they're incentivized on a monthly basis, that was encouraging what they're doing. And they had a whole series of retraining in looking at what they were doing. They rejigged how they did their targets, and everything came down as a consequence. But yeah, it very much is if that's the input you're setting them, then often that's the output you're going to get.
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? Thinking about what would be the effect of having a rolling 3 or 4 or 5 month target or something like that, whereby then the actions at the end of that individual month would not really make a huge difference to the overall number, because you're kind of aggregating a longer period of time, and that would, I guess, discourage that sort of action. I suppose you could see something similar to that in production as well, couldn't you? If you have production targets, forgetting the sales analogy, we've got to make 1,000 of these a month, and we're on the 29th of the month and we've only made 700. Let's ramp it up and try and get to our 1,000, and that's when something could go wrong.
Exactly.
Kevin, you've got a thought on that, have you?
Yeah, just I completely agree, and it also got me thinking then about when we incentivize safety performance. It's great to be celebrated. LTI, millions of hours of LTI free. Way, well done. Okay, but then who wants to be the person that breaks it? So what does that do to incident reporting? Does that then, when you've got your millions and millions of hours, how transparent can your incident reporting systems actually be? Because who wants to be the person to admit that they've done something wrong and potentially lost that accolade? So it got me thinking on the flip side of what you guys were saying there. I completely agree, but I wonder what that does to people's mentality towards safety when you've got that time, and if we're actually getting a true reflection of all of that coming in, all of the data coming in, or if the data is dropped off and the incidents are lower because nobody wants to report it, because nobody wants to be the person that's breaking the 35 million hours LTI free or something. So it's just slightly different thought.
It's interesting, isn't it? And I suppose what this discussion brings out is that there's no simple answer necessarily. So we can look at the pros and cons of all these different approaches, but it's difficult to know exactly which is the best way of going. Isaac, hi, how you doing? Do you want to meet yourself and say hello?
Yes. Hello, guys. How are you?
Yeah, all good, thanks.
That's good. Very, very interesting, this topic. Sorry, I'm in the office, so there is a bit of background noise. Apologies for that. Just to obviously go through what we are talking about. So what should we involve production into our, let's say, safety measures then? Because obviously it's something that sometimes we do it by ourselves without involving production when we are setting target. But should we do so? That's my question.
I would say that, and I'd be interested to get others' views on this, because I've never been run safety in a business, obviously. I would say yes, because I think that, to my mind, safety has to be not sort of sitting on its own in a silo at the side and sort of nagging at people with a clipboard, like we said, but I think it has to be running through. It's just kind of what you do. It's running through the whole organization. So I think where the best successes I've seen for safety performance are where the safety team are kind of embedded and working alongside, and as we said, pitching and cajoling and influencing and partnering and bringing people along for the journey with them. So I think that kind of conversation I would definitely recommend you having, and trying to figure out a way that you can achieve your safety objectives and they can achieve their production objectives, and do so in a mutually beneficial way. I don't know if anybody else has got any thoughts. Kevin, you've got your hand up. I've seen some stuff in the chat as well.
I do. I think Isaac, that's a great question. I mean, I've struggled with that in the past in production and offshore facilities, but one of the best way I've always dealt with it was let them set their targets. Guide them, help them, support them, but let them actually, sit down with the data, go through it, and let them actually explain it to them, and then go, right, how do you think we can improve it? Put the question back on them. If you walk in with a safety certificate, well, I think the best way of explaining it would be, nobody likes to be told what to do. Okay, so nobody likes to be, you will do this today, or you will do that. So if you actually bring them into the conversation and you get them to set their own targets, with your guidance, within the, within the parameters that you want them to be, and you use the sales techniques like Christian was just saying before, and so you persuade them and you sell to them about what they need, get them to set their own achievable targets, and then celebrate when they achieve those targets, and then get them to recalibrate them. That's how I would do it if I would personally.
I think that one of the key things to just to build on that, to bring people along on the journey with us, and again, it's something that that I've learned from a sales perspective, is you've got to meet people where they are. So think about my business, solving slip and fall issues. Now, I look at this and I know this subject in a huge amount of detail, but most people that I talk to haven't given it anywhere near as much thought as me, clearly. And so I've got to, there's no point in me banging on about, technical stuff and this, that, and the other thing when they're thinking about something a lot more basic. So you've got to kind of understand where people are, and then that's when you can start to try to work together collaboratively and shape things. So I think Kevin's advice there is spot on. Speak to them, engage with them, let them set their targets, and then sort of work with them to shape the best way of moving that forward. I think that's very good advice.
Thank you.
No, pleasure. There's some good stuff in the chat here, which I'm struggling to keep up with because there's so much going on. Who's going to be brave and unmute themselves? Come on. Greg's got your hand up again. Go on, Greg.
Hello. Yeah, just really picking up on that point from Kevin again. Sorry, let's put my hand down. And is quite interested in getting that buy-in from all departments. One of the things we have done in the past is actually sit down with the senior management team, with the heads of different departments, and go through their risk register and say, right, this is where you are now on all these things. Are you happy with whatever that score is and the control measures you've got in place, or do you need to improve that? And how does what you're doing in terms of the targets, etc., you're setting on your department affect that? Does it then increase it or does it decrease it? And get them to have a look at that and understand it. And that's where you start getting different people then thinking about, right, well, yes, we can do this, but the consequences of that could be that, and therefore looking to put more intelligent control measures in place and setting better targets where everybody wins, so you improve production and you're maintaining that level of safety. It's a really interesting exercise to do, because while they may be the senior management team, often they don't start to appreciate how different targets or setting different objectives for different parts of the organisation does have a knock-on effect.
There's a good point in the chat actually, saying that needs to be done with them and for them. It's got to work for them, and actually a lot of the time you've got to agree a compromise. And again, I can draw a good analogy here with what I do. If we think about, a 5-star hotel with a polished beautiful marble floor that they shine up to reflect your to reflect and sort of look beautiful, versus is that safe or not? Well, clearly there's a very big mismatch there. You're never going to get them to go the other way and put in a sort of a industrial resin floor or something like that. So it's kind of, what can you do to just slightly achieve that compromise? And that's in everybody's interest. And then that's something that people can buy into. Whereas if you came in again with a clipboard and a stick saying this isn't safe, you've got to do something about it, you must change, then that's going to put their defenses up, and you're just never going to get anywhere. Rosemary, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just, it might be worth kind of mentioning, by the way, if you hear lots of aircraft noises, it's because we're at Farnborough and the Farnborough Air Show's on at the moment, so apologies for that. We traditionally have let the science team actually write their own SOPs. What we're doing now is actually we write the SOPs with them. So we basically say to the scientific teams in the laboratories, what do you do and how do you do it? And then we go and look at it and say, is that really what you do and how you do it? Was that what you think you should be doing? And actually work directly with them to actually achieve the same objective. So we get at the end of it an SOP which they own, that hasn't been foisted upon them, and that everybody agrees upon. And it just, sorry.
That's okay.
It just shortens the whole process considerably. So it for us, it makes perfect sense. And we employ very, very short health and safety policies. we're on the display route. What can I tell you? Yeah, we have very short health and safety policies. Our SOPs are sparing because if you give people too many bits of paper, they're going to ignore them anyway. So it's about being sparing. It's about being absolutely specific, but actually getting them to work directly with you so they own it rather than you owning it and you just sign it off for them.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I love that, and hopefully you're getting some good aerobatics for your sandwich break at lunchtime today.
We had the Korean Air Force over here yesterday in formation. It was very exciting.
Oh wow! I assume South Korean, not North Korean.
You couldn't tell from this distance, but probably.
Yeah. Robin, can I pick on you because you're in an interesting position because you work for an FM contractor, so within the health and safety function, and so you're kind of sort of a little bit removed in some ways from what's happening. Or there's an interesting dynamic between it's not your building, but you're sort of having that responsibility for it. And how what's your experience of how that works in terms of input output, bringing people along, what's promised in the sales process, and then what's delivered? Without going into any commercially sensitive stuff, obviously.
I think probably a lot of the points that have already been made, and I think the point Rosemary just made to highlight that, I think is a great sort of stance to take, where if you put back the writing of SOPs and the sort of, I suppose, the relevant documentation to the people doing the job with a view, write what you do and then write how it should be done. And that's always the approach I try. Look, if we can have an open book policy like this sort of safe space, the old Chatham House rules, let's just, let's be open and honest with one another if we want to make a difference. I think that's the key thing. If everyone wants to make the difference, if you try to influence someone on the difference you can see, but they don't buy into it, whether that be for commercial or just any other reason, sometimes the battle is then led from the world that I'm in within the FM world, that it's client driven. The client wants the change. And probably to give a slight analogy of that, Amazon is a big contract of ours. And I suppose probably like lots of our experiences, where we're either on the front foot or we are sort of dragged up to the standards that's expected. And then by default, we then adopt some of those things internally. And that particular contract is a great example where the client is pushing and driving that change all the way, probably beyond, and they're not interested in budgets and what can and can't be done. If they can see a way of doing something better, they want it done better, and there's no room for manoeuvre on that. But the point they do very well is celebrate that as a combined unit. This is what we have done in conjunction with, we couldn't have done it without, and these are all then the positives. So there's always an internal sort of resell as much as a pat on the back and everything else. And then by default, a lot of these changes you're going to make, you're not going to see any, unless you're specifically, I suppose it depends how good your data analysis is in terms of what you've got and how bad those figures are to need to change. But there's always a positive outcome. And sometimes that's an instant show in terms of the differences that are being made in terms of incident frequency rates or lost time injuries, or it's a slower burn. But either way, if it creates a valued workforce, there's been a lot of talk on the chat and in conversation regarding engagement and buying, and that's the key thing, is it, from everyone. If we all as professionals won't make a difference on our own, we need that buy-in from the individuals, from operational managers to support when we're not there to lead and drive it. And if you've got that right there, and it probably goes back to the cultural piece, which you could probably take back on all of it. But that for me is where it is. Sometimes that battle is, but I think as a business, we are more effective when driven by the client, because it's what the client wants, so the client gets, right? Whereas if I'd have just asked for it, made it as a suggestion, it'll be, it's a bigger slog. That's not right. But I'll put it in the comments box earlier. I think the problem is that when we're delivering sort of bids and tender processes, and we're returning back these PQQs, that we promote how well we're doing, but then who actually sets the safety budget for our contracts? And if I ask that and challenge that, they tell me what the budget is to buy a PPE. They wouldn't know what the budget is for further training, externally or otherwise. So I think it's, setting out from the foundations have got to be right. One, from the buying, the culture has to be that. Equally, there needs to be a monetary budget that by default, if it doesn't get spent, doesn't disappear, it stays there in case. So whether that be additional resource or an opportunity for other engagement, whether it be putting on road shows or whatever else it might be, there's a huge drive for that. And I think that it's, as I say, probably client driven is where we are best at it, you know, in terms of getting things done, which is a frustration, but nonetheless, it's a learning curve.
The analogy there about being, you know, driven by the client, I suppose, is, you know, everyone else who isn't in that sort of third party FM position. The analogy is that the client is, you know, the head of production or the head of operations or the head of whatever, who's a different business unit. And actually, as Robin says, you know, one of the big challenges that I've seen over the years with safety is that they don't often control their own budget, and therefore they can't just proactively decide to do stuff. They need to get it signed off by other people. So it's analogous that you're trying to understand what the client or the colleague wants to achieve, and then supporting them and working with them and collaborating, as we've been talking about. I think that is a good way of going about it. Good stuff. Right, just before we there's still time for more questions, but I'd be remiss of me if I didn't just mention the next round table now. We're going to have a bit of a break because I've got some breaks and holidays and things happening, which obviously this time of year I'm sure other people will have the same. So a couple of weeks off, and then the next roundtable will be the 3rd of August, back at 9 o'clock. I'm going to stick to 9 o'clock for now. I might change it to 9:15 at some point, because some people have said, "Oh, 9 is a bit difficult. Could you make it ever so slightly later?" But perhaps we'll do what I might do is send an email out to everybody and get people's views on that. But we're going to talk about safe business equals successful business. So some of the themes we've talked about today will probably come up, but I'm going to give you some thoughts and examples of what that looks and feels like. So stick that one into the diary. So we've done, somebody said, or even earlier, yeah, we could experiment with doing earlier. Well, I'll send an email out and I might even do like a poll on LinkedIn and ask people to vote on LinkedIn or something like that, and then we can sort of see, because it's kind of it's difficult, isn't it? I think doing it in the morning is good because people can then sort of get to it before something bad happens and and their day goes away from them. So I think doing it at sort of 3 o'clock in the afternoon wouldn't work very well. But yeah, we can have a think about that. So we've done sort of 40 minutes, which is kind of what we aim for typically. I'm happy to take any further interventions if anybody else wants to. Just to confirm, Andy, yeah, we'll stick to 9 a.m. on the 3rd, but then we'll see about maybe for future ones we might change. We might change some of the times after that. All right. Well, look, thank you guys. Enjoyed that. As I say, I'm glad you stuck with me and you didn't just turn off when I said, "Here's why safety should be overseen by the sales director." That isn't exactly what I meant. It was just putting something out there to try to promote a discussion. And I think we had a really good discussion today. So really appreciate it. Join me on Monday for the state of safety. If you want to get all the results and the insights from the research that we did from all the safety leaders, and if I don't see you then, I'll see you in a couple of weeks back on the Safety Roundtable.
Thanks for joining us on the Safety and Risk Success podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit follow and do share on social media. Does anyone you know spring to mind as a great guest, even yourself? If so, please contact us on podcast@slipsafety.co.uk. See you next week for another episode.